Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today is a Patreon request from Rocky Dubray. I'm talking about the debut album from Rustie, Glass Swords. Rustie, Russell White, a mainstay of Warp Records, often credited as a pioneer in the genre of wonky and future bass music that you now see attached to artists like Flume and Hudson Mohawk and Shlomo and that whole crowd. I'd known this guy existed for a long time. I remember when his album Even If You Don't Believe came out all the way back in 2015. I had technically started reviewing at that point, but I let that project pass me by and I never actually listened to his stuff. And unfortunately, Rustie hasn't really put out anything major since that project, so I was never given a chance to look into him in a more timely fashion. Artists like him, I think, are probably best suited for these one-off Patreon requests, I think. People that I wouldn't necessarily have looked into otherwise and haven't given me a solid excuse to go through their stuff. Admittedly, this request was originally going to be for Even If You Don't Believe, but while I was listening through this guy's stuff, turns out I enjoyed this debut album, Glass Swords, way more. So I asked the requester if he was okay with my changing the focus of this video to this album, and he said sure, it's probably his favorite Rustie project too. So here we are. If you want my thoughts on his later two projects, Green Language in 2014 was more commercially focused than his debut, adding in lots of poppy vocal features and guest rap verses that were pretty hit and miss. And the whole mix generally got kinda unpleasant and stale, not unlike Flume's Skin. While more tolerable than that, project also probably wasn't as interesting. And Even If You Don't Believe, honestly, I was even less into. While it did feel predictive of the whole future bass sound that took over the entire EDM scene in the years following, it was also a rather tedious and samey listen that gave me little to nothing to say outside of like 3 tracks near the end that I thought were pretty solid. The rest felt like a less commercial version of the stuff, say, Millennium would go on to do on his Ashes project a year later. Another project I really didn't care for. I don't know what to tell you, future bass is just not my genre. But yeah, obviously when I was listening to this guy's studio albums, Glass Swords came out as easily the strongest of the 3. It's kind of a weird mix of trap and EDM styles with some more experimental textures this side of When No Tricks Point Never. Not the kind of project that would ordinarily be my thing, but it was done super consistently well, hitting just that right balance of being weird and experimental but still easily accessible. It was the kind of thing that wouldn't feel out of place in some EDM festival lineups today. The dated run-of-the-mill trap percussion on many tracks is still a turn-off, and the project as a whole is a bit front-loaded. But the melodies come together in really addicting ways, and the sound design and production is excellent across the board, and all these layers of synth texture sound amazing. It is comparable to Flume in its particular mix of more commercial styles with the more experimental flair, but it is way better done than anything I've heard from that guy. As someone who has ironically never been much into wonky music or future bass of this particular variety, this is probably the best project I've heard in this genre to date. I saw people question why I didn't include it in my Essential Albums of the Decade video. Honestly, I just never heard it until starting work on this video, but I can totally see why people mark it as such a big game changer and a standout of the 2010s, the way it helped lay the groundwork for so many different sounds and styles of the past decade, and still honestly does it better than most of its contemporaries. I bet if I had heard this when it actually came out and it built up more of a personal connection instead of me just getting into it in the past couple of days, it could have been included on that decade end list somewhere. Now, that's not to say that this is like the craziest, most out there stuff I've ever heard. I mean, I have seen people compare it to artists like Aphex Twin and Flying Lotus, probably just because they're also on Warp Records, I don't know. But no, it is definitely not on that level. This is not a Cosmogramma level classic here. Glass Swords is still fundamentally an EDM album at its core, and one that's much more commercial than experimental. Especially from a 2020 standpoint, having seen all these sounds become so ubiquitous on the popular EDM scene, and not so much in more underground circles. Having heard so many other artists come along since that have done stuff in a similar vein to this project, prevented it from being as mind-blowing as it probably was to the people who heard it when it first came out. This is not a timeless project by any stretch, but still it very much benefits from the fact that there wasn't really anything that sounded like it back in 2011. And Rustie was still able to form his own unique sound and style that you can't really mistake for anyone else. Lots of other people have tried to recreate glass orbs, but no one I've heard has gotten this style to actually sound this good. Yeah, this project was great. I can hang on to it. So, individual tracks. I did mention that this project is a little front-loaded. Pretty much all my biggest favorites are in the first half of the album. After a pretty neat intro in the title track that has like these cool flute sounds and a very 80s-ish synth guitar solo, we get right into Flashback, which had me hooked right away. That freaking bass line is borderline funky and drives so much compelling groove, while all the layers of glistening melodies and shiny pads sound incredible on top. That is the way you start an album off right. Perhaps unfortunately it's probably my favorite track in the bunch. That bass line is just so good, and I just wish we got more of it. But he keeps delivering that level of production talent and melodic sensibility with several of the tracks following it. Surph has pretty straightforward trap percussion patterns, which, But the organ-like synths, the deep and enveloping buzzing bass, and smooth background vocal snippets make the mix totally satisfying and gratifying in spite of that. Hover Traps has these very Seinfeld-y bass lines running throughout alongside other bright and colorful melodies. Kind of feels like a more abstract take on I'm Not Alone by Calvin Harris in many parts. They are pretty similar sounding, but I didn't even pick up on that until like listen 5 or so it is not a ripoff by any stretch. Still a definite favorite here. We do hit a bit of a hiccup with City Star, which may have an absolutely gorgeous intro with all these delicate and breezy synth layers, but ends up becoming this overly simplistic trap production with the same old percussion patterns you've heard a million times, and these big flashy synth leads that aren't really accompanied by anything. I mean, it still sounds good enough that I don't feel compelled to hit the skip button, but that one was definitely a step down from the tracks that preceded it. If I have to pick a least favorite on this album, it'd probably be that one. Thankfully, we get back into gear with Globes, another awesome sounding track with an ethereal intro, but builds up into something much more epic and layered and melodically satisfying. It's so dense and has so many sounds going into its mix, but no element ever clashes with anything else, and it comes together so perfectly. Another easy favorite. I just kind of wish it was longer. After this, the album does kinda slide off for me a little, though still delivering pretty solid material. Ultra Thizz does have these kinds of, like, cutesy, pitched up vocal snippets, which are but the monstrous leads and squonking bass lines make the whole mix hit super hard while going up against these little squeaky chiptune-ish melodies, other violin-like synths later, and deceptively thin beat that is more satisfying than it probably has any right to be. Still a pretty solid highlight for me. Death Mountain is a bit more simplistic in its approach, buzzing bass, trance organ solos, and wide TPMV vocal snippets coming together for a pretty strong lead melody. Didn't hit with as much impact as previous tracks here, but still very nice. And unfortunately we hit one of the other low points for me here, Cry Flames. I mean, even this track is pretty good, and I like its airy whooshing intro, and the track that follows hits super hard with its banging percussion and bass line, but the random sounding synth organ solos and super high-pitched vocal snippets, kinda gave me those Flume Skin vibes again. Those were a bit of a turnoff. The overpowering bass lines of Afterlight do come together more satisfyingly, even if they do drown out a lot of the details around them when they come on. I think that track had some, like, airy saxophones in it at one point, though. That track's pretty nice, if not a favorite. Then there's a minute-long interlude in Ice Tunnels. You'd think given that track's much more scant length, it wouldn't really give a chance to leave an impression, but it's actually a really effective breather moment, and all its glassy textures going up against blooping cascades of sine wave generators sound pretty beautiful. Actually ended up being one of my favorites in the second half of this project. And there's All Night, which I'm kind of torn on. On one hand, it's one of the catchiest tracks here with its pitched up choruses, but I wonder if that's just because Break Science came pretty close to this track when they made their track Guiding Light. That may have come out like, I don't know, 7 years later. But I made the connection pretty immediately, and yeah, that track does have a stronger personal connection for me. Is what it is, though. I can't really mark that as a negative for either track, it's just something I noticed and couldn't fully ignore. I will say the project ends pretty strongly, though, with Crystal Echo, a triumphant finale that never feels too abrasive despite all the various layers of bright flashing leads. And, yeah, That's Glass Swords. No, it's not perfect, but I was pretty highly impressed by it. Definitely feels very forward-thinking for 2011, and even if a lot of the sounds and textures explored here have been so heavily retreaded by tons of other artists in the years following, it still holds up better than most of those other artists thanks to its far better and more satisfying production. Even if this project operates in a genre that I don't typically enjoy, it was the kind of thing where it felt like this was the way this genre was supposed to sound like all along. This is the experience that all these crappy future bass producers have been trying to capture for so long but have never pulled off. And yeah, that unfortunately includes Rustie himself. Like I said, his two follow-up projects didn't stand out to me even close to as much. He kinda ended up sounding just like all his contemporaries after this. But, I will take Glass Swords. I may be nearly a decade late to this one, but I feel like I immediately got why it's been held in such high regard. It felt like it effectively demonstrated the appeal of this genre I've never liked with just one listen, and didn't wear out on me with repeat listens either. Maybe not a new all-time favorite or anything, but it feels like an essential part of electronic music history, and if you've somehow missed it for as long as I have, I think that's worth remedying. So yeah, I'm overall feeling a solid 8 out of 10 on this. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.